We're doing a study called How to Live a Happy Life, and it's an excellent study on the book of Ecclesiastes. I think you're finding some very interesting things here. We're going to be looking in chapter 8 today, and we're chapter 7 up to chapter 8. And we're going to talk about who said that life was fair. Who said that life was fair? And what we're dealing with is the problem of injustice. The problem of injustice. Solomon discovers that is one of the big questions that cannot be answered if you leave God out of your life. There is no good answer to the problem of injustice, because how do we take things that are wrong in this life and make them right if there is no God or no eternity? And that's what Solomon is going to wrestle with in this particular chapter. He uses his gift of wisdom, and remember, he's uniquely gifted in this area because God had given him this ability he was wiser than all the wise men that were in the land. And so he uses his gift of wisdom to pursue an answer. If we're going to live a happy life, if we're going to have a successful life, and we're going to show a profit with our life, what do we do with injustice? So let's look at this. First of all, wisdom is like a good reputation. And he begins to define wisdom and what it does within our life. He makes some quite very, very astute observations. He said, foolishness stinks. I'm abbreviating that, but that's basically what he said. A little bit of folly is like dead flies in the perfume. It stinks, but wisdom is like a sweet-smelling perfume. So he begins to say, it's better for us to have a good reputation than it is to go around wearing the best-smelling cologne. A good reputation, a good name, having good wisdom and being able to deal with these situations in life, the difficult ones. But the problem for us is, where are we going to get this wisdom? What school can we attend that is going to teach us how to be wise? The truth of it is, there is nothing more frustrating to deal with than an educated fool. I mean, somebody that doesn't have common sense. As somebody has said, the problem with common sense is it's not very common. And that is true. So where are we going to find wisdom? He says, this is his conclusion, that wisdom is taught by many of the experiences that we have in life. These different things that happen to us, and he draws this conclusion that many of these experiences actually are painful experiences. They're not pleasant. They're things like sorrow and tears and even death. Death can teach you a lot of things. And so he says we should learn wisdom through the things that we have experienced. That these things will help us to become better people if we're paying attention. The problem for so many people is they pay no attention, and so therefore they have to go back through the same process again. They failed the test, so guess what? They've got to take it over again and again. And some people just seemingly never learn. They just keep repeating the same cycle of failure. Solomon talks about the fool here, and he says, and it's kind of amusing the way that he puts this spin on words, but he said, a fool's laughter sounds like the cackling of thorns in a campfire. That's what it reminds him of. That they're laughing, but what are they laughing about? And yet he says, the wise can learn more from a wise rebuke, things that will last us a lifetime. And that is very true. Those that are wise, they learn to listen. They learn to pay attention so that they don't have to go through some of those negative experiences again and again and again. Solomon said what we need to do is to learn to judge things from the final product rather than from its beginning. A lot of things look good in the beginning. They look very promising. They look like they're going to really accomplish something great, but they fail. They don't accomplish what we thought that they would accomplish. So wisdom is learning what we should do and what we should avoid. Another thing that we learned with wisdom is we learn humility. We learn that humility is much better than pride. Now, I wish that a lot of people were listening to this class, because there are so many people that they have an elevated some of themselves. They think of themselves above what they ought to think. And it's a mistake. It's a big mistake. Another thing that we learn as we go through this process of learning wisdom is there is no such thing as the good old days. Now, I find it interesting that Solomon would bring this up, but obviously, even back then, thousands of years ago, they still had people that thought it used to be better than it is today. Solomon says, that is not true. We are foolish to think that people were wiser and better yesterday than they are today. Let me tell you something else. The same is true with the future. If we think that we're so much smarter than everybody else, no. Wisdom wasn't born yesterday, and it's not going to die with us. There's always has been and always will be people that pay attention and learn the secrets of wisdom. So the good old days are usually the product of a bad memory and a good imagination. That's a good way of saying it, because, oh yes, the good old days. There were some good things about those days, but not everything was good. And one of the biggest problems was the problem of the human heart, the human nature. That's always been that way. There's always been people, good people, bad people. And good people that sometimes do bad things, sometimes bad people do good things. It really gets confusing, doesn't it? But there's always been people and problems. It's just a part of life. So we need to learn from our experiences the secrets of wisdom. And we'll learn how to handle some of these injustices, these difficult problems in life. Now here's the second thing that he talks about wisdom. He said, wisdom is like generous riches. In other words, it's better to seek after wisdom than to seek after money, because money cannot make you wise. Money can only provide for our needs, but wisdom helps us to live better lives. We take what we have and we use it in a wiser fashion. Whereas so many people have a lot of money, but they waste it because they are not wise. So wisdom is better. Wisdom really, it can't change life, but what wisdom does, wisdom changes us. We learn through the experiences, we become better people or wiser people because of the things which we are going through. And wisdom actually helps us to enjoy what we have, our prosperity. It helps us to profit from our experiences. This is one of the sad things, that so many people, when they are blessed in life, they waste the blessing. They waste the opportunity because they are not wise. They are not wise, and they make foolish decisions. So if we're going to profit in life, we need wisdom. Wisdom, it will keep us from going to the extremes. Now, I find this interesting that Solomon talks about extremes, because if anybody ever pushed the limits, Solomon pushed the limits. I mean, he didn't just get married one time, he did it 1,000 times. That's pushing the limits, right, to the extreme. But yet, he says that's not a wise way to live. Now, this is the man that pushed the limits, and he's saying wisdom will keep you from doing that. Wisdom will help you to balance your life. What wisdom does, it teaches us that we don't know everything. Have you ever met someone that knew everything, or they thought they knew everything? I mean, you didn't even have to ask them. They would tell you They knew everything. And it didn't matter what anybody said, they could always up it with one better, because they had to be number one when it come to information. And those people usually live very lonely lives. Nobody's interested in staying around listening to them because we know they don't know everything. In fact, we discover very quickly, because they talk so much, that they don't even know everything they're talking about, let alone knowing everything. And so wisdom teaches us we don't know everything. That's where humility comes in, and it helps us to recognize I need some help in life. I need all the help I can get. I need to surround myself with people that know things I don't know, that can see things I don't see. Another thing that Solomon notices concerning wisdom is it teaches us not to live like animals. Now, again, this is very interesting that Solomon would bring this up at this point, but he's talking about wisdom. And he said, one of the things that wisdom teaches us is don't just give in to your base desires. Everybody is going to have animal-like desires, but if you allow those to control you, they will destroy you. And we've all seen that. We've seen people that pursue after whatever the base desire was, whatever it was that they loved, that they liked. They would pursue after that, and it ends up destroying their life. So he said, don't live like an animal. Don't allow your base desires to control you. If you do, you're going to end up in destruction. It's only the person that reverences God. And Solomon keeps coming back to this. Even though he's writing on the subject about life that's lived without God, or life under the sun, life without eternity, he keeps coming back to this because the truth is, without God, there is really no lasting happiness in life. You're never going to live a happy life if you leave God out of it. But the person that puts God in his proper place and reverences God will escape through wisdom the destruction of the carnal-based desires that try to take over and control us. And so what Solomon is discovering here is, if we leave God out of our lives, then we're not truly living. And that is true. When you study the Bible, you realize God is life. He is also love, but he is life. And so if you leave the creator of life out of your life, it's quite obvious your life is going to end up very empty. And that's what Solomon is already drawing conclusions, and he's not even to the end of his research. He's still studying this, seeing if he can find a profit somewhere in life. Now, let me talk about a third area. The third area of wisdom, he said, wisdom is like a great refuge. A great refuge. Now, here's what he means by this. He means it becomes something to protect you from many of the harmful, hurtful things in life. Wisdom can help us to find the direction we should go, the decisions that we should make. Many times, wisdom helps us do that even better than our leaders can help that. We call prayer is a very vital part of this. I believe prayer is not just talking to God, but also listening to God. But the wise person is the person that learns to be able to judge the decision that they should make. Now, this is one of the difficult things, of course, for young people is they haven't lived long enough to have had that many experiences. And so they're still experimenting with life to see what works, what doesn't work, what can I do best. But the person that has gone through a lot of experiences and has learned something through those experiences has become wise. That's one of the things that I realize now in my own personal life is I've reached the stage that I can say, that's where we were, this is where we are, so that means that's where we're going. You're able to make decisions based off of your experiences. That's what we call wisdom. wisdom. And wisdom can help you find those directions. But though we have great wisdom, we still have this problem with our own selfish, sinful nature. Every one of us does. And Solomon points this out, that it doesn't matter what man or woman it is, they're all going to have to deal with this sin nature or selfish nature. We are all born selfish. There's no such thing as an unselfish baby. All babies are selfish. They think of themselves. They don't care it's 2 o'clock in the morning. If they're hungry, get up and feed me. They're thinking about their stomach, about themselves. And the truth is, there is no such thing as someone that is perfect, a totally just man that never does anything wrong. That is not true. In fact, the writings of the apostle points this out so well when he's talking about our relationship with Jesus Christ. And he said he is like a defense attorney. He is our advocate that defends us before God. And he is saying if we sin, he says that we have an advocate with the Father if any man sins. Now notice that. He's talking about any man sin, but then the apostle includes himself in this number and says, we have an advocate. In other words, even the apostle himself, sooner or later, is going to need to ask forgiveness and say he is sorry for something. There's no such thing as a perfect person. Every person has to deal with the problem of sin. Every person has to do that. And if we don't deal with it, the sin will become stronger and take control of our life and work destruction within us. The one thing that reveals our sin nature more than anything else is our tongue. Now later, the Apostle James talks about this, and he said our tongue is literally set on fire of hell. Now, that is a strong statement, but it's true. Have you ever said something you wish you hadn't said? Or, as we say, did you ever say something and you say, oh, I should have bit my tongue before I, said that? Because you didn't say that right. You escalated the problem instead of solving the problem. And so the problem with sin is revealed in our tongue more than anything else. Now, it's humorous the way that Solomon puts it here, but he says, don't pay a lot of attention to what people may say about you. Because the truth is, we all know we've said things about other people that we shouldn't have said. Well, that is the truth, isn't it? We've all made that mistake. So if we've made that mistake, why do we get so upset when somebody says something about us that they shouldn't be saying? Don't take that too much to heart. Why? Because we all have to deal with the sin nature. Now, in talking about wisdom, let's go back and see if we can discover where can we find wisdom. We can't find it in a school. We've already discovered that. There are no wisdom schools or schools that teach wisdom. They teach knowledge. And wisdom is learning how to properly use that knowledge. But where are we going to go and find it? The first thing that he concludes is we will not find it in our learning. Now, that's interesting because here's this wise man, and it's almost like he's addressing a freshman class at some university, and he's giving them advice on how to live a happy life. And he says, you're not going to find wisdom in this school by learning. No, because there are so many things in life that we know are wrong, and yet we don't have the power to change them. Wisdom doesn't have that power. Remember, wisdom doesn't change life. Wisdom changes us, the way we respond to life. So we're not going to discover wisdom in our learning. We can't become wise just because we decide, I want to be wise. No, it takes some other decisions you're going to have to make before you can become a wise person. You're not going to get it just because you make the decision you want to. And the same is true with the things that are wrong in our life. Wisdom doesn't have the power to change those things. It gives us the ability to know right and wrong, so we start making the proper decisions. That's what changes us. But we can't just decide that we're going to do this. Another thing Solomon says is, we're not going to find wisdom in love. Now, that's an interesting observation. You're not going to find it in love. Here's this man that he's been a playboy king. I mean, I've already mentioned he married 1,000 women. If anybody's got something to say about love, he ought to have something to say about love. But he observes what the world calls love usually is nothing more than selfish lust, which ends in bitter disappointment. It's not true love at all. It's more like lust. Now, as I said, if anybody is qualified to talk about the subject of sex, Solomon should be qualified to talk about it. But what Solomon says, you will not find wisdom here. That's not where you're going to obtain it. It's not going to be found there. So you can't find it there. In fact, he goes on to warn us here that sex outside of marriage is like a dangerous trap that's worse than death. Well, those are strong words he's using here, but I believe they're quite accurate. Quite accurate. A living hell is what some people have chosen with their marriage. And so he's saying, when you start living a life of immorality, you've already set yourself up for destruction. It's worse than death. Another thing that Solomon observes, and I believe he's right, we will not find wisdom in this life. In other words, if you leave God out of the equation, you've also left wisdom out of the equation. So if it's only life under the sun, the temporary life, you're not going to find it. Solomon's search for wisdom in this life is coming up empty-handed. He is not finding the answer that he's looking for. He says the problem is there are too many mysteries to life, and he cannot explain to anyone or have anyone explain to him what these mysteries really are. What is the solution of it? He says something has gone wrong in the world. It's what we preachers call sin. Sin. It's something that's broken or twisted in our human nature. That is the problem with this planet. He concludes because there's something that's twisted or broken in this life, then that should be evidence there is another life. He's absolutely correct. In fact, that is the problem of injustice. See, we want to be good, but something has been twisted inside us that makes us what he calls scheming sinners. Scheming sinners. Always plotting, conniving, trying to get the advantage over someone. Paul talked about that in the book of Romans, the 7th chapter, and verse 19. He said, the things that I would do, I don't do them. The things that I would not do, I find myself doing them. He's talking about the same problem that Solomon is talking about here. This problem with the sin nature. Now, how many times have you said this? How many times have I said it? In fact, probably everybody has said it. That's not fair. Have you ever said that? Where did you get that concept? Who told us that life was fair? Where did we get that idea that life is fair anyway? We certainly didn't get that from this life. Where did we get the idea of injustice? It doesn't come from this world. Because the truth is, there are very few things in this life that is fair. Very few things. It's not fair that I have more food than I need to eat, and 2/3 of the world is hungry. and 1/3 of the world is actually starving. That's not fair. It's not fair. And you can go on and on with just one illustration after another illustration. There's very little in this life that is fair. So where do we get this idea that life was supposed to be fair? It's the problem of injustice. And it's our desire for justice, or our reaction to injustice, that is one of the greatest proofs of the existence of God. It's one of the greatest proofs, because this concept of justice, it does not come from this world. We've all seen it with our own eyes. Injustice that's coming out of the courts, unjust rulings, unjust decisions. It doesn't come from earth, so that means there must be a heaven. And that is his conclusion. This problem of injustice is a problem we're not going to solve in this life. He comes to the conclusion that there's only one that is truly just, and that is God. That is God. And as I said, we haven't even come to the end of the book yet, and yet he has already reached the conclusion. If we leave God out, we cannot deal with the problem of injustice. So it's our proper respect and reverence for God that is the beginning of wisdom. This beginning of wisdom, that is where we start our relationship with God. And if we're going to live a happy life, that's where it's going to begin, in our relationship with God. So, who said life was fair? Life is not fair. God is fair, but life is not fair, and you must not confuse the two. God is the only one that is fair. And so I encourage you, in your journey of life, put your faith in Jesus Christ. Put your faith in God, and he will take the injustice that we experience and turn them for good, and he will make it just for us, and life will be fair. God bless you in your journey of faith.